Okay, so till now we have studied about the bean postprocessors. That is, when a bean postprocessor, what a bean postprocessor does for us. So we write our own bean postprocessor, that is my bean postprocessor, you remember, which implements the interface bean postprocessor of a Spring, and which has two methods. So bean postprocessor is the one which performs post processing on a bean after it has been loaded, and this applies to all the beans which we have defined in the Spring.xml. So you remember in the beans lifecycle, I told you that we have two IOC containers, BeanFactory and an application context. So when those IOC containers or the BeanFactory is being loaded, then immediately after that we can perform some processing, which is done by nothing but a BeanFactory post processor. So at that point of time we can perform a post processing on a BeanFactory after the BeanFactory has loaded, and all the bean definitions are being loaded inside that BeanFactory. So at that point of time my BeanFactory post processor works. So if we see and go to the life cycle, see, BeanFactory being set up, then a BeanFactory post processor is called after all the beans are being loaded with its bean definition, but not instantiated, just loaded. Then bean post processor is being called, and then bean is being ready to be used. So how we can use the extra feature of a Spring by writing our own BeanFactory post processor. So let's see, it's also an interface just like a you can write that it's my BeanFactory post processor, right? And then it needs to implement just like bean post processor. Now it needs to implement BeanFactory post processor, right? So it has implemented an interface, so it will add the unimplemented. We just have one unimplemented method in it, that is the post process BeanFactory method. So whenever this BeanFactory post processor is being called by Spring, then this method is called after all the bean definitions have been loaded, but before the beans are instantiated. The difference between bean definitions just being getting loaded and being instantiated, it's just that they will loaded the bean definition, no wiring, nothing is being done. So that is known as instantiation. Properly we are just preparing a bean. So before that the BeanFactory post processor is called. Now we have written our own BeanFactory post processor. What I need to do is in order to use this, I just need to, like I have written this here, bean post processor, right? Similarly I just need to register my BeanFactory post processor also over here. Here you get a configurable. So let's just say that this does a job, this is just a factory, because that factory is being prepared. So bean definitions are being loaded, at how many beans are there. So let's just count those beans only. See, so I'll say bean count. factory.get bean definition count. This will give you the bean definition count. Also, you can just, to make sure that after the bean factory this is being called, I can show the by just printing one in my bean factory post processor, which will does the processing after the bean definitions are being loaded but not being instantiated, and we can get the count of the beans. So as I have registered it, and also I'll not call the director class now, I'll be calling a manager class, right? So let's just run it. It's showing an exception, the class path source is invalid. What? Oh, I didn't close it, right? Okay, so it shows you that it's in my bean factory post processor, and it gives you the count of the bean, that is 6, right? And after that you can see that we have 6 beans. First is this, second, third, fourth, fifth the director, and the 6th one. So all bean count it has given me. And after it initialize the bean, because we are going to the manager class, we must have used that init and the destroy method over here, my own init and my own destroy method. So it calls that, and then it calls the address method and calls the destroy bean. Was in the spring.xml, I have not done it using initializing bean or disposable bean, but I have just defined my init and destroy method. So this is how bean factory post processor works for us. That is, after the bean definitions are being loaded, it's going to call this one, right? So even if I just, let me just remove it for the time being and try to run it. Still, so you are getting the same output. Clear? Okay, so if you're using application context container, you don't need to do anything. Just register your bean factory post processor like the bean post processor in my spring.xml, and this will be called the immediately this loading the XML build definitions from that XML, and then this is being called. So after bean definitions are being loaded, it is called bean count. It gives out whatever processing we want to do, and then beans instantiation is done after this being bean count, and then the flow normal it works. Now if we see the real usage of this bean factory post processor, we'll see that we have very useful implementation of this bean factory post processor, which is being given by Spring. So that is, if we see, we have a 2 bean factory post processor being given by Spring, and we don't have to write it. So that is my very useful implementation of a bean factory post processor by Spring. One is the property placeholder configurer, and the another one is custom editor configurer. Now how this is being used in my Spring application, we'll see the implementation of it in the next tutorial.